Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today, we're going to be going over another one of the sigils. We've already covered the sigil of lethargy, which I think is going to be really popular this season, the sigil of rancor, which has kind of an odd effect of it, and then finally the sigil of death. The sigil of death is weird, in my opinion. It's kind of like a corpse explosion, sort of, but not a corpse explosion. So let's go over really quickly like how corpse explosion works, and we're going to talk about like how this is different than corpse explosion and why. So corpse explosion, our generic corpse explosion on the necromancer, which of course has a lot of love in the game because it's very powerful, requires a corpse to use the ability. Explodes for 50% fizz and then 50% fire. And that's pretty much it. It explodes when you use a corpse, and 50% fizz, 50% fire. It does a lot of damage. It does between 70 to 120% of the corpse's HP, which means that exploding a potentially very high HP corpse is a huge difference than exploding a low HP corpse, for instance, like a maggot or something. Now, this ability has 70 to 100% of slain enemies' health, but it's fire explosion damage, not physical and fire, which means that it's pure fire. Another problem with this ability is it doesn't actually consume any corpses to cause the explosion to happen. Instead, what it does is it waits for the monster to have less than 13% health before culling them. It would be much easier to call this a culling strike than it is anything else, because what it does is it waits for the monster to reach a specific HP threshold and then causes them to explode upon reaching that HP threshold. The problem is that if you outright kill a monster very quickly, then they don't explode because they never reach that HP threshold. In other words, if you attack a monster and the monster has, say, 100% health, and you deal 100% health and damage to that target, then the monster goes from 100% directly to 0, never reaching 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1%, which would trigger the sigil. In fact, in most cases, from what I've been able to see, the sigil doesn't actually activate when you have a very good setup. So if your damage is very high toward the end of the game, like for instance, once you start getting your really good gear and once you start getting your really end game weapons and your skill points are all in place and you have your torch and your Annie and all the other things, and you're just doing better as a character, I notice that the sigil death does not go off very often at all. However, earlier on, when your character is kind of sucky and your damage isn't that great and you're having trouble killing things, it does seem to do very well. And so from one of the things that I've noticed with this ability is that it tends to work much better earlier on when you're struggling, and it tends to be very poor later on when you are doing very well. And I can give you some examples of this. So let's go ahead and grab like Apocalypse, for instance. And Apocalypse does some pretty crazy damage, right? It does 13,075 at the moment. So we're going to go ahead and use it on this group here. And as you can see, like we did get some explosions, but for the most part, it was just Apocalypse killing them. And this has to do with the fact that, well, you know, if you're killing the monsters very quickly, like with Apocalypse, it does massive amounts of damage, then it's not going to trigger very much. It could potentially work better with damage over time abilities like Flame Wave. And you saw the explosions happen, right? Because if Flame Wave doesn't actively kill the monster outright, it does a large amount of damage over time on the ground as a result. So it does hit them with a hit, but then it also applies a dot underneath their feet, which can help reach that 13% threshold. And basically what I've been able to determine with this ability is that it's really good for leveling. Like if you are a character who is struggling as a starter, it's going to help you tremendously with clear speed on a lower level character that doesn't have good equipment. However, later on, when you have a character that has really good equipment and you're one-shotting and two-shotting things, it's going to be relatively useless because you're just not going to get that explosion actually happen on a regular basis. Another problem with the ability is, of course, is that it has to be the monsters that are standing within the circle, which makes it very difficult to one-point wonder the ability. So if you only have one base point and you don't have a lot of plus to skills, it has a very small radius and a very small duration, which isn't really the most amazing thing. If you have at least a decent amount of plus to skills, the duration is not bad. It has like around 24 seconds right now with a level 20 skill, so I have plus 19 skills. So if you do have a large amount of plus to skills, it can definitely be useful. But earlier on, you don't have a large amount of plus to skills, and so you find yourself casting it all the time just to get the effect on the monster, because of course it has to be on the ground and the monster has to be standing in it, which can sometimes be an issue if you're a caster because you're kiting a lot. It's a little bit of an odd ability. Do I think it has some potential? Yeah, it definitely has some potential, and I definitely think that there are going to be some characters that are going to utilize it. But being fire specifically, as opposed to fire and physical, like corpse explosion, which maybe it is fire and physical, who knows? Maybe there's like a behind the scenes there where it does something different than what it states. But being fire only, and then also like having trouble actually getting it to proc, the duration being a little bit low, the radius being a little bit low. Once you get some points into it, it can definitely be useful. I would totally use this with a dot build though. Like I think this would be absolutely amazing if you had like a poison build, fire damage over time, like maybe even the miasma damage over time would be interesting. Basically anything that's not going to outright kill the monster with a single stroke. This could definitely be very interesting because it could allow the ability to work properly. But abilities like Cleave, Mirrored Blades, Echoing Strike, Hexbane, even abilities like Apocalypse probably aren't going to allow the Sigil of Death to really kind of like work and do its magic. So far, I've been very impressed with the sigils. The lethargy sigil is absolutely amazing, and it's going to be like a 1-point wonder on like every character, I think. The Rancor sigil definitely has some interesting connotations for beefing up your minions, mercenaries, and even maybe other people's mercenaries, which is kind of neat. And the Sigil of Death definitely has some good leveling potential. I do feel like as a leveler, as a like starter character, that Sigil of Death is going to be quite powerful. I just feel like it's going to fall off toward end game when you have your character fully established. So you play around with it to your leisure. Let me know what you guys think of the ability. I think that's pretty much it. I do believe there's a Sigil of Death proc on one of the new items. I can't remember which one it is. It's not Coven. Coven is Lethargy. And then the new Authority armor is one of the miasma chains. Can't remember right off the top of my head. Is it this one? Yeah, it's the Ritual Knife. 13% chance to cast level 1 Sigil of Death when struck, which is kind of interesting. I'm not really sure exactly how useful that would be, since it's only level 1 and has a relatively short duration. But it should potentially be up all the time, so I don't know. As always, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button if you enjoy the content. We're going to be moving on to the miasma skills next. And as always, keep watching.